What's up, everybody? CHM Carnivores here. I hope you're having a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Now, this video, we're going to talk all about which species make the best hybridizers. We're going to talk about some common ones, things that you would probably expect, but then we're also going to talk about some not so common ones that you wouldn't think would be great hybridizers, but in fact are. We're also going to talk about why they're good hybridizers, and we're also going to talk about what you can expect from those hybrids. What are the pros and what are the cons? There's a lot to cover. I hope you enjoy it. See you soon. All right, everybody, like I talked about in the introduction, we're going to talk all about what Nepenthes make the best hybridizers and what you should look for in each of those. So I'm going to go over several different types of plants. We're going to talk about the more common ones that you see that a lot of growers use to hybridize their plants with. We'll talk about what are the benefits of those, but then we're also going to talk about some not so common ones and why I feel like those are actually just as beneficial as some of the more common ones. We'll talk about what you can expect from each of these types of different hybridizers, what they bring to the table, both pros and cons. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to start off with the most common and the one that you hear most about, which is Ventricosa. Now, Ventricosa there's a reason why it's used a lot in hybrids. It provides a ton of stability to your plants. Ventricosa is a bulletproof plant that grows extremely well in several different conditions, and so it is a good stabilizing plant, especially when you mix it with a species that tends to be a little bit more cantankerous, like a Velosa or a Hamada or a robcantleyi. It will bring a lot of stability. So that is a good quality, a good pro for that plant. The other pro for Ventricosa is it produces a lot of basils, and so if you are new to the Nepenthes world, basils are where it's at. That is the exciting thing about growing Nepenthes, is the getting more Nepenthes, right? And so when these basils are created, you can cut them off and create new plants, or you can let it grow and just have a bush, which means more pitchers and just all around more awesomeness. So that is the pros of the Ventricosa. The cons are, if you're looking for a plant that's going to produce large pitchers, Ventricosa will tend to remove that from the hybrid. So you will get a lot of species, even if you mix a Truncata with a Ventricosa, you're going to get still quite large pitchers, but not going to be nearly the size they would be if they were mixed with a different hybrid. So that is more of a common one let's talk about. So let's continue to go up the list. The next is Merliana. Now, Merliana is a very, very much a lowland, ultra lowland plant. It likes it very, very hot, and it can be hard to grow for most growers. However, it makes an absolutely wonderful hybridizer. It adds a lot of stability to the plant. So in itself, by itself, it's not exactly the most stable plant, but when you mix it with a hybrid, it becomes very, very stable. The cool things about Merliana is it's going to give you very, very big leaves, which is really neat if you like this sort of big spatulate leaves, and it'll also give you a lot of size. If you want a pitcher that's going to be enormous, you want to go the Merliana route. It is going to give you enormous pitchers. The drawback to Merliana is that it's not always, depending on what it's hybridized with, it's not going to be the fastest growing. There are some, like this one in front of me, that pretty soon is going to be all on the way, that produces very fast, which is a Nepenthes Caesar or a Nepenthes Brutus. But for the most part, Merliana will kind of slow down your plant unless it has sort of a warmer temperature. It does very well in mixing and will produce nice intermediate conditions, especially when paired with a highland plant, but it will slow it down. The next we're going to talk about is robcantleyi. So you will see a ton of plants out there mixed with robcantleyi, and there's a few reasons for that. Robcantleyi will not only give you the size, so most hybrids that you breed with the robcantleyi will produce a much larger variety of that plant, but also the peristomes. So you're going to get a very flared peristome when you mix it with a robcantleyi, and so that is a very sought after quality in a Nepenthes. And so if you mix it with something like a Hamada, has very pronounced toothy peristome, or if you mix it with like a Spectabilis that has a very striped peristome, or even a Veitchii, you're going to get a really beautiful peristome that's flared with a lot of color. Now, the downside to robcantleyi is robcantleyis are very, very finicky when it comes to water on their leaves and the amount of consistent moisture in their media. And so this tends to be seen pulled through on the hybrids, so you will get a lot of spotting on the leaves, a lot of oedema, and so it can, depending on if the species that you're mixing it with tends to be a little bit finicky too, they can be a little bit more difficult to grow than most hybrids, but not necessarily a difficult plant. So next, let's talk about Truncata. Truncata, just like robcantleyi, will produce large pitchers. It makes a wonderful stabilizing plant. Truncata is a very, very much a bulletproof Nepenthes. It can withstand a lot of different growing conditions. It is very much epiphytic, and so it can stand a lot of drought time as compared to most other Nepenthes. It will produce the size, which is also amazing. Truncata will also does a very good job of complementing the different traits of other Nepenthes. So if you have a plant like a spectabilis, it will pull out a lot of those spectabilis colors and will pull back some sort of the Truncata and the dormancy. Now, Truncata, it will grow the biggest plants when it is the mother. If it's the father of the plant, it's going to take on more of the other species, which is pretty much common with most Nepenthes hybrids, but they won't produce as nearly large pitchers. Like, for instance, Biok by Truncata is going to produce smaller pitchers. The drawbacks, to me personally, and I might be a little biased, there's not a whole lot of drawbacks to a Truncata hybrid, other than it will grow a little bit slower depending on what it is mixed with. Now, if it's mixed with Ventricosa or something like that, it will speed up, but for the most part, it will be a slower grower, as Truncata is slower. Also, depending on what you mix it with, you will get a lot of leaf traits. So the pitcher will pull in some of the traits from the other plants, but the leaf trait will be very much a Truncata. I happen to love the truncate leaves. A lot of people do, so that is certainly not a drawback for me, but it might be for other people. Now, Hamada. Let's talk about Hamada. Hamada tends to be a very, very finicky grower. It is very fragile by itself as a species, but it does hybridize well, specifically when you're mixing it with more of a stable plant like a Ventricosa. The benefit to a Hamada is you're gonna get that toothy peristome, and it comes through in a lot of ways just like a Singulana would, and so you get that very, very toothy peristome, especially when you mix it with a Volosa or Trismatiensis. But even with a Ventricosa or a sort of a lesser toothy plant, you're still going to get that nice toothy peristome. Some of the big ones are Spatulata, robcantleyi. Any of these that have the larger peristomes mixed with the Hamada is going to give you big flare, and then also very good striations on the peristome. You won't have that really crazy toothy part unless you mix it with like an Edwardsiana or something like that, but it still produces some really cool hybrids. The drawback being that Hamada tends to be a little bit more of a finicky grower, and so depending on what you hybridize it with, you can bring some of that finickiness into the plant, which can then sort of make it a little bit more of a difficult hybrid to grow, although not a terribly difficult plant to grow. So, Aristoliides. So Aristoliides, it produces a very tiny, very unique sort of egg-shaped trapdoor-looking Nepenthes. It is really cool. The pros are it will produce compact growth for you, very small pitchers if you're in a closed space or in a terrarium setting, and it will produce these really cool otherworldly plants. The cons is it is a very, very, very strong genetic, and so whatever you hybridize it with, there's good chances it's going to look like an Aristoliides. There are exceptions if you start getting the more complex hybrids, but for the most part, it's going to take on the Aristoliides shape, and you might get a little bit of a difference on the peristome. Specifically, if you mix it with a Merliana, you're going to get a much larger, or a robcantleyi, much larger Aristo, but it's still going to have that shape. Now that brings me to Vigilii. Vigilii is another one that makes a wonderful hybridizer. The only drawback is Vigiliae is extremely strong genetics, and almost invariably, whatever that you hybridize it with, you're going to end up having what looks like almost completely a Vigiliae. So the drawback is that if you're looking for some strange sort of unique plants, it's going to be a little difficult with that, because it does tend to always take on the Vigiliae as opposed to the other plant. But it does produce a lot of stability, and the Vigiliae upper pitchers are quite amazing in themselves, so it produces some uniqueness there. Next one is Platy Kyla, or some people say Platy Kyla. Platy Kyla produces these really cool, unique upper peristomes that are very flat, almost like a dinner plate. But the other thing that's cool about Platy Kyla that I've seen is it brings a very unique green tint to your pitchers. So a lot of the hybrids that you get, I actually have a Spectabilis by Platy Kyla, is going to have a very bright lime green to it, and so that brings a lot of dynamics to the pitcher. The downside is they're always going to bring in that green, which I don't see as much of a downside, so it's very low downside here. But if you're looking for variety, having multiple types of Platy Kyla, you're going to end up having a lot of the same looking pitchers. It almost looks like a Maxima with those green splotches in there. Now, Edwardsiana, you don't see as many hybrids with Edwardsiana, but that one is going to bring you size, and it's also going to bring you a lot of toothiness. The downside being that Edwardsiana is very expensive, and so whatever you hybridize it with is also in turn going to be very expensive. The other thing is it tends to like very, very highland conditions. Now, I have seen it grow in intermediate, and I've even seen it grow in lowland, which is pretty crazy. But there is very little downside to it other than the cost. And if you're able to get one, that's really cool, especially if you're able to get the Holy Grail of Truncata Edwardsiana. Now, I could make this video 40 minutes long, but I'm going to leave off with this one, and maybe we'll do a part 2 of your hybridizers, and that is Lowii. Lowii makes an absolutely phenomenal hybridizer. Now, which is funny because Lowii by itself is a very, very finicky plant. It is very, very prone to temperature changes, humidity changes, and is a very slow growing plant. But when you hybridize it with things, it tends to bring a ton of stability to the plant, and it also brings that really woody pitcher. Now, the Holy Grail is the Truncata Lowii, which is going to give you big, enormous pitchers that are very, very stout and very woody. There's a very little downside other than cost. Again, usually other than like a Briggsana, the Lowii hybrids are going to be pretty costly. That's all I'm going to talk about today. We'll maybe do a part 2. There's a lot of different plants to go over and different hybridizers. I wanted to give you a small amount here without chewing up too much of your time. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have questions or if you want to comment about what you think is the best hybridizers, there's still a lot out there to talk about. Spatulata and the sky's the limits with several others that we will get into. But this will be enough for our first video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know how you feel in the comments. As always, have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.